Anne Boleyn had the crown, the gold, and the power, but she could not buy her way out of a deadly Tudor winter. Ironically, the Queen of England was slowly being killed by the very things meant to keep her warm, from toxic mold and unhygienic clothing to the lethal secrets hidden in her fireplaces. The reality of castle winters was far darker than the history books suggest. What surprises many people is that 500 years ago, European winters were actually much colder than the ones we're used to today. This had a very unusual cause, one we still sometimes hear about in the news, but rarely connect with very cold weather. Winter in Tudor England and across much of Europe during the 16th century was shaped by the Little Ice Age, a period of cooling that profoundly affected daily life, the economy, and social stability. Rivers like the Thames in London, along with seas and waterways across northern Europe, frequently froze solid. When this happened, important trade routes turned to ice, preventing ships from transporting goods and leaving communities cut off from one another. Snowfall was frequent and, during the most severe years, could be catastrophic. It didn't just cause minor inconvenience. Snow could build up into huge piles that blocked roads and sometimes even covered peasants' small houses in low-lying areas, isolating them from the outside world. For someone like Anne, winter travel was still dangerous despite her wealth. The court often traveled with horses, wagons, and servants. Roads were not as smooth or as well-maintained as they are today. Usually they were simply dirt paths full of mud. When temperatures dropped, the mud froze into hard, uneven ground. Ice and slippery roads could cause horses to lose their footing. A fall could injure an animal and throw passengers from their carts, putting them at risk of very serious injuries. But there was also another extremely dangerous thing that people did during winter. During severe freezes, rivers could become highways. People sometimes walked, skated, and transported goods across frozen rivers. Even more surprisingly, they sometimes held markets on the ice in a desperate attempt to earn money after the frozen rivers had taken away their livelihoods. But the ice was unpredictable. It could suddenly break, causing people to fall into the freezing water and drown. One reason winters were so cold back then was that several major volcanic eruptions occurred during this period. Huge eruptions send large amounts of tiny particles into the atmosphere. These particles reflect sunlight back into space, reducing the amount of heat reaching Earth and lowering temperatures for months or even years. But while winters in Tudor towns were harsh, the conditions inside the castles where Anne lived actually made them far more dangerous. Anne's winter clothing looked like a masterpiece of fashion, but England's unique weather conditions actually made it smell so bad that most modern people would not be able to stand near her. Fur was one of the most important luxury materials in European history. In Tudor England and across Europe, it stood for warmth, wealth, and power. It was also one of the best materials people had for keeping themselves warm. The Tudor elite wore many different kinds of fur, but some came from animals you would never expect. The most common furs were warm, but they were not as costly or respected as other types. The most valuable version came from Northern Europe and Russia. It may sound strange today because these animals are mainly viewed as adorable garden visitors, but historically, squirrels and rabbits were hunted in enormous numbers for their skins. Shockingly, poorer people in some parts of Europe, especially during times when other materials were difficult to find, used fur from domestic cats and dogs. People also searched around rivers for animals whose fur could be used for winter clothing. This fur was extremely valuable and was often used to make hats. It came from beavers. However, there was one type of fur that was the most famous among royals. Its soft white appearance made it especially prized, and over time it came to represent purity, power, and royal authority. It was ermine. These materials helped Anne and other nobles stay warm, but they came with a serious problem. England's climate was naturally wet and humid, and Tudor buildings had no modern way to remove moisture from the air. Keeping fur dry was a constant struggle. When fur became wet, it grew heavy and lost some of its warmth. Eventually, it could develop a strong, musty odor similar to the smell of a wet dog. Furs also frequently attracted parasites such as lice and absorbed sweat, smoke, and the smells of food. But what happened during Anne's morning routine in such harsh winters was when things started to become dangerous. While poor families shivered in cold wooden homes, Anne and her court hid in their private chambers, not knowing they were living with a silent, invisible killer in the place where they felt safest. History books often skip the darkest details of the lives of Anne Boleyn, Henry VIII, and Europe's tragic rulers. If you want the full story, join our Patreon. You'll get exclusive videos with no ads and dark history facts you cannot find anywhere else. The link is in the description. What Anne dealt with was impossible to see. A place like Hampton Court Palace could be luxurious by Tudor standards, but it was still a large stone building in a cold climate without modern heating or insulation. Castles and palaces could be shockingly cold, much colder than most people imagine. In winter, the temperature inside many rooms could be only a few degrees warmer than outside if there was no active fire. Large stone buildings absorbed the cold and required enormous amounts of fuel to warm. Tudor windows were also much less efficient than modern ones. Even wealthy residences had gaps around the frames and poor insulation, allowing cold air to enter easily. You might think fireplaces easily solved this problem, but that was not true. A huge fireplace looked impressive, but it was nothing like central heating. Near the fire, it was warm and comfortable, but across the room, it could still be freezing cold. The morning experience was probably the worst. During the night, the fire was allowed to burn low or go out for safety reasons, while cold air entered through the windows and gaps. One of the servants' first jobs in the morning was to restore the warmth, but a large room did not heat up instantly. It could take hours. When Anne woke up, the air was chilly, and her breath could easily have been visible. The floors were excellent at holding the cold. Walking barefoot or wearing thin footwear would have been miserable. We can only imagine how awful it must have felt to put on luxurious but cold fabrics on mornings like these. But what Anne did not know at the time was that the cold was not actually the most dangerous part. Tudor fireplaces are among the most overlooked and uncomfortable features of life in castles and palaces. They were essential for survival, but they were also harmful. The main issue was that fireplaces did not burn fuel as cleanly as modern heating systems. They produced smoke, soot, ash, and tiny particles from burning wood or charcoal. Modern fireplaces are designed to control airflow and remove smoke efficiently. Tudor fireplaces were much more basic. A common problem was that smoke did not always travel straight up the chimney. Instead, it could drift into the room. The smell would cling to clothing, hair, and bedding. Living around constant smoke could irritate the body. People's eyes could water, burn, and suffer from irritation. The smoke could also make their throats dry and sore and cause them to cough. But the most shocking threat was the carbon monoxide produced by fireplaces like these. Carbon monoxide is created when carbon-based fuel burns incompletely. The risk increased when rooms were poorly ventilated. Carbon monoxide poisoning can cause dizziness, confusion, and even death. But this was nothing compared with the dangers and shocking discomfort hidden inside a typical Tudor bed. The Tudors used a bed-warming tool that could quietly turn a freezing night into a deadly one. For someone like Anne, the bed was probably one of the warmest places in the castle, but it was not warm in the modern sense. A high-status Tudor bed was a major symbol of wealth. The famous four-poster bed style was designed partly for warmth. The curtains were not just decorative. They trapped body heat, blocked drafts, and created a smaller, warmer space. A closed bed with curtains could feel dramatically warmer than the surrounding room. A royal bed could be decorated with silk, velvet, and gold embroidery. But to us, beds like these would not seem luxurious. First of all, there was a massive problem across the entire world, not only in Europe. Wealthy households reduced this risk with cleaner linen and servants, but this was far from enough. Even royal beds were not free from it. They easily attracted fleas, lice, and bedbugs, leaving people in a constant state of itching. Another issue was even more uncomfortable. These problems were not exclusive to Anne, Tudor England, or even Europe. They were simply an accepted part of life in the past across continents. It is normal for humans to sweat and produce body oils, especially in warm spaces. Linen sheets were changed and washed, but not as frequently as they are today. The bed itself, especially the mattress and curtains, was much harder to clean. As a result, beds often smelled of body oils, fireplace smoke, and the perfumes people desperately used to mask these odors. There is also a popular image of medieval people putting animals in their beds for warmth. This did happen in some situations. Small animals could provide warmth, and dogs sometimes slept near people. However, for a queen like Anne, this would not have been the normal method. A royal bed was a symbol of status and privacy. But the Tudors also used another method to warm their beds, and this is where things became truly life-threatening. One common method involved using bed warmers. They were useful because they heated beds effectively and removed the shock of climbing into freezing sheets. But they were also risky. Wealthy households had servants who managed these dangers, but unfortunately, accidents still happened. Bed warmers were containers, often made of metal, filled with hot coals, heated stones, or sometimes hot water. A servant would place the warmer inside the bed before the person went to sleep. A container filled with hot coals and placed near linen sheets, curtains, and wooden furniture was obviously dangerous if it was left there for too long. It could set the bedding on fire, but this was not the biggest danger. Apart from the possibility of accidentally overheating the bedding and burning someone's skin, a charcoal-filled warmer could also release harmful gases. If it was used improperly in an enclosed space, it could contribute to carbon monoxide poisoning. The same principle caused deaths later in history when people used charcoal braziers indoors. But winter made Anne's hygiene habits far worse than usual. One major winter danger in Anne's castles came from something many people still do today without realizing how badly it can damage their hair. Tudor hygiene is often misunderstood. The stereotype that everyone was filthy and never washed is not accurate. People in the Tudor era did care about cleanliness, but their definition of it was very different from ours. A Tudor person might not have bathed frequently, but they valued fresh linen underwear, clean hands, combed hair, and pleasant smells. The linen shirt or shift worn next to the skin was extremely important because it absorbed sweat, body oils, and dirt. Changing linen could make someone feel clean, even without taking a full bath. Wealthy people could have wooden tubs, heated water, and servants who prepared their baths, but obviously nothing like a hot shower existed. Bathing had to be planned and prepared for well in advance rather than being a spontaneous decision. Winter made bathing especially difficult because rooms were cold. Getting wet was extremely uncomfortable, and drying took much longer. You can only imagine how awful it must have felt to take off your clothes inside a freezing winter castle. Many people also woke up to icy water that they were expected to use to wash their hands and faces in the morning. But hair was especially difficult to manage during such winters, and caring for it incorrectly could lead to another health problem. It was not simply because of the freezing temperatures. A Tudor woman did not wash her hair every day because it was a complicated process. It required heating water, drying the hair, and styling it again. But there were no hair dryers. In winter, wet hair stayed damp for much longer, and castles were generally uncomfortably damp. Modern science teaches us that regularly going to bed with wet hair, especially in a dark, warm environment, can contribute to scalp problems, including fungal or yeast-related conditions. However, a much more realistic Tudor hair problem was not fungus. It was something else. Winter could make the problem worse because people wore more head coverings. kept their hair covered more often, and spent more time indoors. All of this could make an already existing worldwide problem even more uncomfortable. Lice. It doesn't mean that Anne definitely struggled with these issues, because there are obviously no historical records claiming that she did. However, when we consider the realities faced by people who lived like her, in the same places and with the same habits, it is not impossible that this was something she dealt with. But the cold during Tudor nights was only one part of the reality. Winters also caused much more bizarre problems that we rarely imagine Anne and other nobles could have suffered from. One overlooked part of winter life in castles quietly harmed the health of even the richest royals and nobles. Yet those dark winter nights also had one surprising benefit that many people ignore today. A winter night in a Tudor castle would have been a completely different sensory experience from a modern night. During the worst winter weeks, a castle household would spend around 16 hours of the day in some form of darkness or artificial light, meaning there were only 8 hours of daylight. Even someone as wealthy as Anne lived in a world where darkness was the default and artificial light was a limited, expensive resource. However, one of the most annoying parts of trying to sleep at night came from something unexpected: the other people in the castle. Around late afternoon, the household shifted from daytime activity into evening mode. The castle would not suddenly become empty. A royal residence like Hampton Court could contain hundreds of people, including the royal family, ladies-in-waiting, guards, musicians, and many others. A castle was full of hard surfaces, so sound carried easily. At night, it was normal to hear footsteps on stone floors, doors being shut and barred, and voices echoing through the corridors. A single person walking down a corridor could sound surprisingly loud, but these sounds were harmless compared with another noise that could be both terrifying and dangerous. A castle was not a sealed or insulated building. At night, when everything else became quieter, it would become one of the main sounds people heard. Wind could enter through gaps around windows, roof spaces, and chimneys. Rushing through narrow openings, it could create high-pitched whistles, strange moaning sounds, and sudden changes in tone as its direction shifted. A corridor or tower could almost act like a giant instrument. But snowy storms at night caused castles to react in even more shocking ways. Today, a storm happens outside a sealed box. We have insulated walls, double-glazed windows, central heating, and electric lights. The Tudor castle was a massive stone structure. During a storm, people could literally feel the building living. They could hear doors shaking in their frames, wooden roofs and beams creaking, and shutters banging against the walls. Strong winds could even damage parts of the castle. All of this may have affected Anne's mental well-being in ways that most people today rarely experience. Modern research shows that light exposure strongly affects the circadian rhythm and can influence mood. We cannot diagnose Tudor people, but the same biological mechanisms would have existed. People likely felt more tired, had less energy, and generally felt more depressed. However, there was one surprising benefit. While complete darkness during winter nights could feel terrifying to many people, modern sleep science shows that sleeping without any lights is much healthier than sleeping next to a television, LED lights, or a phone. But there was one final danger hiding on the walls, and it was impossible to escape. One very common winter problem in castles was caused by a mix of almost everything we have discussed before. In some cases, it could even become deadly. As you already know, Tudor castles and palaces were not sealed, dry buildings like modern homes. Their thick stone walls stayed cold for months. When warm indoor air touched these freezing surfaces, moisture formed on the walls. At the same time, windows were often kept closed or covered with shutters, cloth, or oiled material to keep heat inside. Royal households could also contain hundreds of servants, guards, officials, and visitors. All of this created perfect conditions for dampness. It was probably one of the most miserable and constant discomforts of winter life in a Tudor castle. It was not usually a dramatic, water dripping everywhere situation. It was more of a persistent feeling that nothing was ever completely dry, warm, or fresh. But dampness alone was not the most dangerous part. A royal chamber filled with expensive fabrics could make the problem even worse. During summer, sunlight, warm air, and open windows helped buildings and fabrics dry. During winter, wet cloaks remained damp for much longer. Wooden furniture dried slowly, and moisture became trapped inside rooms. A wet wool cloak hanging near a cold wall could remain slightly damp for days. Wool tapestries, linen curtains, wooden furniture, and other natural materials created perfect places for mold to grow. Anne may have slept surrounded by mold, especially when staying in older residences. However, a queen's chambers would have been maintained much better than ordinary rooms. The mold itself was not usually deadly, but damp and mold could still contribute to illness. The real danger came from the combination of cold stone, damp clothing, smoky rooms, infections, and poor sanitation. Together, these conditions increased the risk of pneumonia, breathing problems, and general weakness. Mold growing on stored food could be even more dangerous. Poorly stored grain, nuts, and other foods could sometimes contain harmful fungal toxins, which could potentially contribute to death. The most striking truth behind all these winter hardships is that Tudor luxury was never about achieving perfect comfort. It was about making discomfort manageable. But as terrible as winter life could be during Anne's time, it was nothing compared to what the wives of Henry VIII had to endure because of the king himself. Henry actually had an inbred wife, but not many people know who she was. Click the video to discover her story.